continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Arias, before we broke for lunch, we were discussing your breakups or the history thereof that you were asked about yesterday. We just finished with Mr. McCartney, so I want to move now to your breakup with Mr. Brewer in 2006. Okay?
Okay.
In that regard, you had said previously that, I'm probably paraphrasing here, but the relationship kind of was fizzling out or coming to an end to some degree. Is
Yes.
that?
In 2006, yes.
Okay. And was that period where, at least in your mind, it began coming to an end, was that before or after you met Travis Alexander?
It was starting to fizzle a little bit before. I'd say the summer of 2006 was a big wake-up call for where I was going in my life. And Daryl and I weren't progressing in our relationship.
Okay. So, but you, as you've told us before, you didn't actually end the relationship with Mr. Brewer until after you went to the prepaid legal convention in Las Vegas. Is that correct?
That's correct. I was still officially in the relationship, committed to him. Yes.
Officially, what was the last part of that sentence?
Committed to him.
Committed to him.
Yes.
Okay. And that is why, as you've told us previously, you didn't kiss Mr. Alexander or anything during that conference, correct? Was this the reason why you didn't have contact with Mr. Alexander?
Yes. Prior to breaking up with Daryl, I didn't have any kind of inappropriate contact with Travis.
And any kind of contact, based on what you've told us in terms of your view of fidelity, would have been inappropriate. Is that accurate?
Overall.
That's my philosophy, personally. Yes.
Okay. So when you go back and you well, let me ask you this: when you came home from the prepaid legal convention, were you thinking, okay, it's time to break up with Daryl?
When I left convention, it was painful because I knew that there were changes on my horizon and Daryl would be one of them. It was difficult for me to make that decision because I loved him a lot, but it didn't fit my future anymore because he didn't want the same things I wanted.
So when you broke up with him, did you sit down and talk face to face in your home?
Yes, we sat at the kitchen table.
Okay. And in terms of that breakup, was there yelling and screaming?
No, there was none of that. Just a civil conversation.
And in terms of how the relationship ended, it sounds like you would have been the one who at least initiated this conversation. Is that correct?
Overall, to me, answer.
Yes, I asked if we could talk, and we sat down at the table.
Okay. Now, at this point in time, you and Mr. Brewer still own the home in Palm Desert together. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
Okay. And it sounded like from your previous testimony that you still had a lot of bills to deal with and that sort of thing together, mutual bills.
Yes, utilities, mortgage. Mm-hmm.
After you broke up with Daryl, how long did the two of you obviously didn't have other places to live at the time of this conversation? Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
We only had the house for living arrangements.
Okay. So do you both stay in that house for some time?
He stayed until early December, and then he moved back to the Monterey Peninsula.
Okay. So we're talking about, after this breakup, we're talking approximately 4 months, or 3 months, I guess, of cohabitating and not being a couple. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And was there romantic or sexual interaction between the two of you after this conversation?
No sexual. The only one romantic gesture he did is before he hopped in his truck and pulled out of town. He kissed me on the lips. I wasn't expecting that, but that was the last time that we had any kind of contact of a romantic nature.
The time period between you broke up and the moment in time you just told us about him pulling away in his truck, was the relationship between you and Mr. Brewer, would you describe it as civil?
Definitely.
And you were dating, to some degree, you were dating Mr. Alexander during this time period. Is that accurate?
I would say we were seeing each other, but we were not boyfriend-girlfriend.
Okay. And to your knowledge, was Mr. Brewer dating anyone at this period of time?
To my knowledge, no.
Did you feel the need to hide your dating or budding relationship with Mr. Alexander? Did you want to keep that from Mr. Brewer?
I wanted to keep that from him out of being sensitive to his feelings and concern for how I didn't want to parade another guy in front of him, so to speak.
Okay. After he moved away, did you still need to discuss bills and things related to the house?
Yes.
Apart from needing to have these business type discussions, were you and Mr. Brewer, would you characterize your relationship with him during this period of time as a friendship?
With Daryl, yes.
And that chain of friendship, if you will, that began even back in 2006, it's still together today. Is that fair to say?
Yes, we're not close, but we're still on friendly terms.
And going back to what we talked about earlier with Matt, who you said like as a brother-like figure, you're still friends with Matt today to some degree. Is that accurate?
The same. We're not close, but we're still friends.
Okay. Now, we heard when you were questioned about your breakup with Travis that occurred on June 29th. And what year was that again? Was that 07?
Yes, 2007.
Okay. This was a telephone call, this breakup, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you testified that the next day, in responding to the questions, that you were back on the phone with Travis. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Why were you back? I mean, you've broken up. It would seem natural that perhaps some distance might be in order. Did you want distance?
Well, we were distant as far as physical distance because I was in Big Sur, California. He was in Mesa, Arizona. But I don't know. I guess I wanted us I wanted the same thing eventually, which was to be able to be friends with him. But we just had broken up less than 24 hours previous, and I was still in love with him. So I was conflicted, obviously, because I no longer trusted him.
You also mentioned, I think the part that makes it a little harder to understand is the part about the fact that the phone conversation got sexual the very day after you broke up.
Objection, establishing that makes it a little hard to understand.
Approach, please. May continue.
This sexual conversation with him you had the day after you broke up, you freely engaged in it, didn't you?
Yes.
Why would you engage in this conversation after breaking up with him the day before, and for the reasons that you broke up with him on the day before?
It goes back to the day before. When I broke up with him, he was making promises that he would change. He said that he loved me. And so the conversation didn't start sexual, it started sentimental, and then it moved into more of a sexual nature, I guess. He was complimenting me like, "You're so hot," that kind of thing. So I just kept talking to him because it was pleasant and he was saying nice things. And then at one point I became aware of the fact that he was masturbating while we were having this conversation. And I was in the driveway of the red house at Fontana.
Why should you have this conversation, not to describe it?
Sustained.
Sorry.
Why did you keep going why did you keep engaging in this conversation when, as you say, you perceived him to be masturbating?
I don't know. I guess a part of me felt, I had very low self-esteem at the time, and a part of me felt he still values me above other people, I guess, that he still is attracted to me even though, and he's trying to win me back and all these things. So I was kind of flattered by it, I guess.
Okay. Now the issue came up regarding what were termed as suicide letters. Do you recall that coming up earlier today?
Yes.
I want to show you a few exhibits, being 514, 515, 516, 517, 518, 519, 520, and 521. Without speaking to the content, could you just review these exhibits and verify for us that those were the letters you were referencing this morning?
Yes.
They are.
They are the letters I
They are
wrote.
those suicide letters you were referencing earlier?
They're suicide letters and a drawing of what I wanted my grave to say.
Sustained.
And Ms. Arias, showing you what's been entered as Exhibit 510. You had been looking at that of 8/26/07. You've been contemplating suicide for quite some time, hadn't you?
Objection made.
Sustained.
You've been contemplating suicide since August 26, 2007?
Same objection made.
Yes, during that time period after I moved to Wairika, I feel like
Objection beyond scope. Has she been contemplating it since that date? The answer is yes.
Sustained.
You've been contemplating it from August 26, 2007 till the time of your arrest?
no, there was a break. But
And what was the break?
after I moved out of Arizona, I didn't feel suicidal as much until after Travis passed away.
And so, just so we're clear, we're talking about when you left Arizona in the U-Haul in late March or April of 2008, correct?
Yes.
Okay. There was a question posed to you about what I believe to be this journal entry, and also in Exhibit 510. About how you were staying in Rachel's tonight. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Being asked about that particular or that particular journal entry?
Yes.
Okay. Is that a minimization that you were talking about?
Objection made.
Overruled.
It was not very specific as to the reasons Travis would be upset. I didn't go into those reasons. I was just voicing a few thoughts.
Okay. To your recollection, Ms. Arias, have you composed any journal entries that relate to the idea of not writing certain things in your journal because out of fear of what Mr. Alexander would think?
Yes.
Approach with Exhibit 522. Would you take a look at Exhibit 522? Will you read it to yourself and advise us what that is?
This is a journal entry that I wrote just a few weeks after, after a few weeks after the argument that we had, where he wouldn't let me leave the room.
Objection. If she wants to give a date, that's fine. But beyond that, I would object.
Sustained.
I remember the date.
Well, the date that you wrote the entry.
Oh, the date, I'm sorry. It's 11/5/07.
And was that your entire entry for 11/5/07?
It appears that entry is complete, and the next one, it shows part of 11/6.
Okay. Your Honor, I'm going to move to admit Exhibit 522.
I have no objection.
It was admitted.
And again, we're looking at a date of Monday, November 5th, 2007. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And you were describing for us what this entry was actually subsequent to one of the acts of violence that was perpetrated upon you. Is that accurate?
Will you repeat that? I'm sorry.
This entry was subsequent to one of the acts of violence that was perpetrated upon you. Is that accurate?
Well, yeah, when he pushed me, yes.
Objection, I issue which act?
Overruled.
You say he pushed you. We talked about these incidents, so maybe if you could just give us a little more of the details of what specific incident you're talking of.
Okay. It was a night we had an argument in his bedroom. It was the night that he wouldn't let me leave. I tried to get up and leave, and he stopped me and pushed me, and I fell down. I fell on my knees. And he basically demanded that I listen to what he was saying. And a short time later, I got up to leave again, and he did the same thing. The third time I got up, he let me leave. He followed me, though, all the way out to the car, saying things behind me as I walked all the way down the stairs, out the door, and out to the driveway. So that was the same night that happened.
I want to draw your attention to there is a paragraph that begins with the number 2. Do you see that there?
Yes,
2 nights ago.
yes.
And I'll move it for you when need be, but if you could be so kind as to read that area to us.
2 nights ago, I called Travis to say goodnight, and right on the outset of the conversation, he made a point in making it clear to me that he didn't mean all of those harsh words he said the other day.
Okay. Looks like the sentence goes a little bit into the next page. Could you finish the sentence?
And that he felt really bad.
Okay. This reference that you make on 11/5 to 2 nights ago, and that he said some mean things or harsh words that he didn't mean. Is that related to this incident and the things he said about your family?
Objection, meeting.
Overruled.
Yes, the conversation of 2 nights previous that I say there is a conversation where we were referencing the argument of a week or 2 earlier to that. Yes.
Okay, so I want to make sure I understand you correctly. You had this argument or this incident with him where he's not letting you leave the room and saying some mean things about your family. But then it sounds like you had a conversation about that incident I guess what would be on November 3rd. Is that correct?
Yes, that was after he found the negative things I wrote about it and made me tear it out. And I think it opened his eyes to some things.
Okay. So this isn't a reference to the violence in the bedroom. It's a reference to a conversation you had related, sometime later related to the violence in the bedroom and the removal of things from the diary.
Yes, and then I documented that conversation 2 days later, which would be the 5th.
Okay. All right. Could you read the next sentence for us?
He asked that I forget he ever said any of those.
All right. And that's referring to the words he said when?
The night of that argument.
Okay. The 3rd.
I'm sorry?
The 3rd of November?
That's what he said on the 3rd, but he asked that I forget what he said on the night of the argument.
Okay. Part of forgiving, in my opinion, is to forget and let it go. But you're writing about it. Can you explain that to us?
I'm not writing about the part that I want to forget, which are the words. I'm writing more about the experience. Does that say Sunday on the 5th? Okay, Monday. The reason I'm writing on this topic is because that Sunday it was a topic in RS's Relief Society, and that was a topic in church. It's where the women meet for that hour, about how once words are spoken, they can't be unspoken. And it just seemed along those themes, so I was journaling about that.
Picking up right here where he says, even now, could you read that sentence for us?
Even now, even still, I'm haunted by those words as another statement just popped into my mind.
And again, just for clarification, are we talking about words that were said on the 3rd or words that were said during this violent altercation, or are we talking about both?
Will you repeat that? I'm sorry.
The words, you say the words that were spoken still haunt you.
Yes.
And so which words are you referring to?
His harsh words during that time, it was still relatively fresh, and they kept playing like a recording in my mind over and over. So they were haunting me in that regard.
You say that, start reading from the sentence that says, I won't write it down.
I won't write it down, however, as I promised to Travis that I wouldn't do so as part of forgetting it.
When did you make that promise to him?
The day that he tore out the entry where I wrote the negative things about that night, the night of the argument.
Okay. And that is what we saw in terms of the pages that were removed from your diary a few days back?
I don't think those were the specific ones, but they are in there. Yes, there were some pages torn out.
All right. Now, referencing back, you were asked a couple of different questions about men whom you had an interest in, we'll say the spring of 2008, after you moved back to Wairika. Remember being asked about some of that?
Yes.
Okay. And you mentioned an individual by the name of Steve Carroll.
Yes.
And if memory serves, that was an individual that you met through a website called LDS Linkup. Is that?
Yes.
Okay. And was this, seems to be implied in the name, but to your understanding, Was this somewhat of a Mormon dating site?
Not necessarily dating, it's a Mormon social networking site, so it could be for dating, friendship, family, any of that.
And you, in the spring of 2008, even after breaking up with Travis, you can still identified yourself as a member of the Mormon Church. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And you had mentioned that the church encouraged you to date as much, maybe date's not the right word, but to interact as much as possible. Is that accurate?
Yes, once you become an adult, a legal adult, the church encourages you, well, I don't know about teenage years as far as 18, 19, but definitely in your 20s, the church encourages you to focus on the goal of marriage and find that person, and if you're not going to marry a certain person, not to put it bluntly, to waste your time with that person.
And when we're also talking about interaction as well, we're talking about very innocent, if you will, dates.
Yeah, I never physically met Steve Carroll. It was only online and brief. But as far as dates, as far as the church policy, they encourage dating. As far as going out on dates in public places, not places where you might be led into temptation, that kind of thing.
Okay. So in this time period then, in the spring of 2008, you would have been how old?
27.
Okay. And we kind of heard at least how 30, 31, that kind of age was a magic number, if you will, for single Mormon men, correct?
I wouldn't say a magic number. It's more like a dreaded number.
Okay, a dreaded number. So you were at a point in time in your life at this time where were you also at a point in time in your life where you were also seeking marriage and family because you were getting close to this number, this dreaded number as well?
Yes, I wasn't as close as Travis. The number applies to both men and women. You're expected to be married by that age. Not everyone does get married by that age in the church, but it's more or less expected of you. And obviously I was getting closer by the day, and when I ultimately make the determination of whether or not I would want to spend my life with someone, I would need plenty of time with that person first. I can't just pick somebody and say, let's go. So
whether or not she dreaded the date or she...
Same.
Well, I guess one of the things that makes 30 a dreaded number in your church is not turning 30, but it's turning 30 and being single. Is that accurate?
turning 31 and being unmarried.
Okay. So at age 27, you weren't seeking to avoid turning 30, but you were seeking to be married and start a family before that age. Is that accurate?
Yes, 31. It's 31.
Okay, 31.
But yes, that's accurate.
Okay. So in that regard, you were maybe not exclusively, but part of the reason you were on LDS Link Up is to find a potential boyfriend or find a potential mate. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, somebody that I might be able to progress with.
Okay. So, and Mr. Carroll was one of those individuals, at least you were interested in or early on or to some degree, right?
I met Steve Carroll online sometime in...
Objection, she was asked if she was interested in him, not when she met him.
Sorry.
Was he a person that you were at least beginning to explore an interest in?
Yes, somewhat.
And at that point in time, Mr. Dixon, we've heard about, was only a friend. and not a romantic interest because he was not a member of your church. Is that correct?
I can't say that my interest in him was not romantic, but it was something that I would not pursue because he was not a member of the church. So I kind of put a stop loss on any feelings that may have developed had we gone that route, but we never did.
Okay. And Mr. Burns was another individual, Ryan Burns, that you were interested in at this point in time as well. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Okay. But I want to be clear as well. You hadn't even met Mr. Carroll in person, correct?
That's correct. We just emailed a few times.
And apart from meeting Mr. Burns at a business meeting in Oklahoma City, you had not met him in person again since that initial meeting. Is that correct?
That's correct. A meeting I didn't even remember, actually.
Okay. So at that point in time, really, this spring of 2008, based on what you told us, would it be correct to assume you wouldn't have identified yourself as having a boyfriend at that period of time?
That's correct.
In that regard, in this period of time, what was Mr. Alexander to you?
He was my ex-boyfriend. He was kind of like a best friend in a way because we were still very close. The best way to put it is that it was complicated, but we were not in a committed relationship.
Had any of these, well, you were still having sexual interaction with him, at least over the phone, as we heard in May of 2008. That's accurate, right?
Yes, that's accurate.
You also talked about being sexually monogamous with one person if you were dating them or they were your boyfriend, correct?
Did you ask if I had talked about that?
No, well, you mentioned that before in your
Yes.
testimony, that you were sexually monogamous in the context of a relationship.
Yes, I am.
And
Was.
a relationship is the only context actually that you've engaged in sexual activities. Is that correct?
In a relationship?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Had things progressed with Mr. Carroll, Mr. Burns, or anyone else, would that have meant the end of the sexual interaction with Mr. Alexander?
It would have, he would have been cut off. I think you had mentioned an all-access pass that would have transferred to somebody else, I guess you could say.
Okay. To your knowledge, did Travis know that?
He knew that I was loyal, and he knew that,
Did he know it? Yes or no?
To your knowledge, did Travis know that you were loyal?
yes.
And I'm sorry,
I said yes, I'm sorry.
talking about the trip that you began on June 2nd, was Travis aware of your plans to go to Utah?
Yes.
And based on your belief, do you believe he might have sensed that you were going there for exploring another potential boyfriend?
Objection, speculation.
As her belief, Judge.
Yes, because he teases me about it on the tape. When-
Objection, she was asked whether or not, it's a yes or no question, whether or not he sensed it.
Why did you sense that he had this suspicion?
When I mentioned I was going to Utah, he kind of was asking, well, why are you going to Utah? And I told him to see friends.
Sustained.
He was inquisitive about the purposes of your trip. Would that be accurate to say?
He was inquisitive, yes.
And based on the verbiage he used, you believe his inquisitive nature related to assuring that this trip didn't involve another guy.
I don't know about assuring, but it related to his desire to find out if that's what it was about.
Okay. You were also asked about as it relates to the trip, the gas cans. That's a few different questions about the gas cans. But the one I want to focus in on, Jodi, is the question related to a response you made related to getting the gas cans from Daryl. Do you remember being asked about getting the gas cans from Daryl?
Yes.
Okay. Was taking gas cans on a trip, and your answer seemed to be, was something to the effect that was common practice for you. Is that accurate?
Only after we moved to the desert and realized the extreme conditions of the desert in the summer. I didn't take them on all the trips, just within desert areas. For example, if I was going to Portland, I wouldn't take gas cans.
Okay. Now, as it relates to this trip and kind of what was going on in the interaction you were having in this time period with Travis, you were questioned about the trip that Mr. Alexander was going to take to Cancun. Do you remember being asked about that?
Yes.
Okay. And you were also asked to some degree or earlier about this woman that you saw Travis making out with and I'm going to use the word making out for simplicity in his home. Do you recall being asked about that?
Yes.
Okay. And over the course of your relationship, not perhaps when he was doing it, but did you know that Mr. Alexander was dating a girl whose name at the time was Lisa Andrews?
Not while he was dating her. I found out afterward.
Okay. But during the course, you found out afterwards, meaning, but still during the course of your relationship.
During the course of...
And I should be careful here. During the course, when I said relationship, I should have said friendship with Mr. Alexander.
Yeah, whatever our relationship would be defined as. Yes, I found out during that time, I guess.
And when you found out, that didn't end, the sex didn't end. Is that accurate?
I think we did have sex because I found out 2 days before I pulled out of town. So I think we did sleep together again after that fight.
Okay. So in a few days you pulled out of town, meaning when you moved to Wairika?
Yes, a few days because it happened the same day that he choked me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, well, obviously, we know that it didn't stop because you had sexual relations with him on June 4th, or with Travis Alexander on June 4th as well, right?
Yes.
And you had, even after you had this knowledge about him dating Lisa Andrews, you also engaged in phone sex conversations with him, correct?
Yes.
Okay. While I'm on the topic of phone sex conversations, a question was posed to you about whether or not you had recorded other phone sex conversations with Mr. Alexander. Do you remember that? I think that happened yesterday.
Yes.
And you said that you had recorded those conversations, if I recall correctly. Is that right?
That's right.
Do you know what became of those?
After June 4th, I deleted them.
And just so we're clear, was this on the same phone that the May 10th recording was found on, or on a different phone that you deleted these recordings?
It was on the phone that was replaced by the phone that the May 10th recording was on that phone. I believed it was stolen a week later, so I got another replacement phone through the insurance that I had on the phone. And so the subsequent recordings were on that phone. And then after everything happened, I deleted it to, well, one, it's embarrassing as hell, but two, I didn't want that to be known about Travis either.
Okay. So we know about Lisa Andrews and the girl that was standing outside the window. You also, and without going into names, you also mentioned that Travis had an interest in having a threesome during your relationship. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that involved another woman, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you told us that that was something that you were, I believe your words were, willing to go along with.
I'm not sure if it had gone up to the moment, if I would have gone along with it or not, but I entertained the idea with him.
Okay. And on this phone call as well, before we talk about the phone call, you had told us that you knew about the trip to Cancun. I think it was, you said, somewhere in the ballpark of a year before it was to take place. Is that correct?
Yes. It was announced right around the time that he and I broke up.
Okay. Was there any point in time when Mr. Alexander had asked you to accompany him to Cancun?
No, never.
And did the idea of going to Cancun with Mr. Alexander, was that something that did you ever ask him, I'd like to go to Cancun with you, or something to that effect?
No, I never asked him anything like that.
Okay. When did you know that Travis was dating or had an interest in Murray Hall?
It was sometime in late winter, early spring, 2008. It was sometime, somewhere in the first quarter of 2008, I would say, but it was before we went to convention. I remember that.
And you still engaged in sexual behavior with Mr. Alexander even after that knowledge, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And at some point in time, well, you knew that his interest in her, was it your understanding that his interest in her was more than fleeting, shall we say?
At first, he didn't tell me a lot. He just showed me pictures of her. And then after that, I understood that he believed that he was receiving signs from God that she was to be his wife.
When he showed you pictures of her, was it with also the expression that he had a romantic interest in her?
Yes.
Do you recall if that, do you recall when that happened?
When he showed me the pictures?
Yes.
Oh, it would have been in early 2008. I don't recall exactly the month even.
Okay. Why, in your half of the equation then, you know that he's interested in this other woman, are you still interested in, are you still willing, I should say, to engage in sexual behavior with Mr. Alexander?
Well, I was conflicted. They weren't dating like officially exclusively. They were not boyfriend-girlfriend, that was my understanding. They had gone on 2 dates or 3. So I didn't feel like I was enabling him to cheat on her by any means, but at the same time, I also was conflicted with the idea that what we're doing is not helping either of us spiritually, especially if he thinks he just met his future wife. So I was conflicted.
The conflict that you described that you were going through, and I know you can't read Travis's mind, but were you of the understanding that he was conflicted as well, or was he simply just still interested in engaging in sex with you?
Conflicted about what?
Well, he has this girl, shows you a picture, says this is going to be my future wife. That's what you just described for us, right?
Yeah, not when he showed me the picture, but he did share that with me, yes.
Okay. Yet, he never stopped, based on what we heard in May 10th, and through your testimony, he never, to your understanding, lost a desire to have sex with you. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Okay. When you saw this picture of Marie Hall, and he says, this is going to be my future wife, are you jealous?
I didn't feel jealous. And he didn't say, this is going to be my future wife. He just said, this is a girl he's interested in. But when he began to talk about her, I can't say it was jealousy. It was kind of bittersweet because I knew that I wasn't going to marry him, but I still had feelings for him, and I knew I needed to move on. And I knew our relationship was unhealthy. So I still have feelings for him, but it's more like bittersweet because I still have a desire for him to be happy as well as me to be happy.
Okay. And you mentioned you knew you weren't going to marry Travis. There's conversation on the tape about, marrying other people and whether they will live up to your sexual relationship that you had with Mr. Alexander. Do you remember that discussion being on the tape?
Yes.
Okay. So even as late as May of 2008, you knew you weren't going to marry Travis. You had no desire to marry Travis. Is that accurate?
I knew I wasn't going to marry him, and I can't say that I had a desire to marry the Travis that I knew as Travis to be at that point. Yes, that's accurate.
Okay. The fact that, back in 2008, in the spring of 2008, you said Travis never asked you to go to Cancun. Did you have a passport at that time? You
Yes.
could have gone? Okay. Did you have ever, as it got into May and June of 2008, did you ever have any expectations that you would be going on this trip?
No, it was never a discussion.
Because international travel would take some preparation, correct?
Yes.
Were you jealous in any way that he was taking Miss Hall to Cancun?
I didn't know he was taking Mimi Hall until after June 4th.
Until after June 4th?
Yes.
Did you ever, without telling us his response, did you ever inquire who are you taking?
I did mention it after I moved back to Wairika, and that's when he mentioned the babysitter of his friends.
Okay. And he didn't tell you the name of this babysitter?
No, just that it was a trade-off for debt he owed.
Okay. Now you spoke about, in response to one of the questions about having unconditional love for Travis. Do you remember speaking about that?
Yes.
And would it be fair to say you still have that today?
Yes.
You were asked a couple of questions about your ability and reasons to stay with Mr. Alexander after a couple events. One of those events was when he had sex with you while you were asleep. Remember being asked that?
Yes.
My question to you then is, was it that unconditional love that allowed you to keep being with him even after that point in time?
There may have been an element of that, but it was more because at that time I was in love with him, and I was already familiar with him physically, emotionally, his personality, all that. I was familiar with him in a lot of ways, so when that happened, and because I was in love with him, it didn't feel like he had violated me in a big way. Like it was something that just happened, not necessarily intentionally, kind of by accident. Oops, let's move on and not do that again, was kind of how I looked at it.
The question then, I guess, if you could describe for us, what do you mean, how, I asked you about unconditional love and you said it was because you loved him. What's the difference in your mind?
Between unconditional love and being in love?
No, between love or being in love, however you want to phrase it, and this unconditional love that you speak of.
Well, I think there are different kinds of love. I have unconditional love for my family members, friends. I think I had mentioned before that I have a certain, there's an advancement, I guess you could say I have a certain amount of love for everybody. Travis, it was a deeper unconditional love because I had, personally inside, I had a desire to see him be happy. And then being in love is a little more intense. I've never been in love with more than one person at a time, so it's an individual thing or experience for me. And it feels good, that kind of thing.
Okay. You mentioned, you were asked about being able to stay with him after seeing what you saw him do in January 2008. Was that being in love, or was that the unconditional love that allowed that to keep going?
I don't know how much I was still in love with him by that time. There was definitely unconditional love, and it was strong. I'd say there was still an in-love element there, but it wasn't as strong as it had been 9 months earlier. It sort of began to wane a little bit.
Okay. You were asked about Travis and his sex and its correlation to anger and the de-stressing that was brought up in your answer. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. And I want to know a little more clarification when you say, and you made a comment that this was like code in your relationship. De-stress was like a code, right?
Right.
Okay. So maybe you could help us by breaking that code, what de-stressing meant.
De-stressing means to relieve stress in any form through sex.
Okay. Through any form of sex.
No, through any form of stress, through sex, I guess any form. Whatever meant his climax, because that would help him relax.
Okay. You also mentioned that that this system, if you will, this relaxation, also correlated to his anger. Do you recall talking about that yesterday?
Yes.
Okay. So, can you explain that to us?
Yes, sometimes we would argue, and if sex followed that immediately after the argument, it signaled the end of the argument. There were times, like when the fight where he wouldn't let me leave, I left finally, and he called me to come back, and I came back, and we had sex, and we were done fighting. So it changed the mood, the atmosphere, the energy, and it put him in a better mood.
Okay. If you can, I want to see if we can use an example that you've talked about during the course of this trial, and this anger, the end of anger through sex that you talked about. Do you remember telling us about on June 4th how after the CD didn't work, you threw the CD on, or he threw the CD on the ground, and eventually this led to him grabbing you by the arm and bending you over the desk? Do you recall telling us about that incident?
Yes, but to be clear, he checked the CD at the wall, like it was on his desk. He hit the wall probably not much farther than this desk, and it rolled backward.
Okay. But you know the incident we're talking about, right?
Yes.
Okay. You had made a comment to us that you were okay with this activity, the sexual activity, because it was an alternative to him getting more angry or perhaps physical. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that then a illustration of what you're talking about related to sex and anger?
Yes, that's another example.
Okay. And as it relates to June 4th, and what happened in the bathroom, sex as a way of quelching this anger was never an option to you in the bathroom. Is that accurate?
Yes,
Sustained.
Was sex an option available to you after you dropped the camera on June 4th as a way to de-stress Mr. Alexander?
Definitely not immediately. It certainly wasn't in the heat of that moment.
You were asked about the gun when you learned of the gun. Do you recall being asked that? I think that happened yesterday.
Yes.
And you said that you became aware of that in 2007 when you were working as his housekeeper, correct?
Correct.
What was your understanding of how Mr. Alexander had acquired that gun?
My understanding of how he got the gun is that his father used to,
Objection, hearsay, that's all of this,
No, it's her understanding, it's not his statements.
based on hearsay.
Approach, please. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take the afternoon recess. Please be back in the designated area at 3:20. Please remember the admonition, you are excused.